We have Anena Harriet. Good morning.
Morning, Flavia.
Welcome to Morning at NTV.
Thank you.
You're an author, you're a poet, you're a journalist.
Yes.
Anything else I've missed?
I'm a farmer.
Hey. Typical Ugandan. You're all farmers.
Yeah.
So you are a writer of poems and short stories. And every time I have a writer here, I'm trying to understand the background of how they got to it. Who taught them how to write, and where was this even born? Because when we're growing up, I think one of the writers here said, you know, we grew up reading, our parents would get us books to read, and I said, what? Apart from the notes we had to read in school, it wasn't such a thing for our parents to teach us how to read, let alone writing. So what about your story?
So I grew up in a family where my dad particularly loved reading. So I had occult public textbooks lying around, and then when I joined Sacred Heart, literature was one of the compulsory subjects, at least from senior 1 to senior 3, and so I took the subject, and it was interesting. So I fell in love with books then, and I think the writing bit was born largely out of the situation in northern Uganda at the time. I remember asking myself, how does it feel like being in other parts of the country? How does it feel like living without, you know, running away from home? And so I asked those questions
So you were born and raised in Gulu?
Yes.
Okay. So
I asked those questions in a book, and by senior 4, I'd written a story, The Plight of the Acholi Child, where I chronicle what it means to live in a situation of war. And that poem won a writing competition that was organized by Acholi Religious Leaders Peace Initiative, and it earned me a scholarship to high school. Yes, so from that time on, I kept writing, but once it was on the paper, that's where it ended. Until much later, that's when I started sharing my work. You
were telling me how you don't really like to talk. Is it shy or you're just reserved?
I am reserved, I think.
You're reserved. Yes. So the talking is not, you would rather write.
Yes, writing comes more naturally to me than talking.
So I'm wondering the plight of the Acholi child. I'm trying to go back then and sit with you as you're writing the story. What's going on paper? What are you saying?
So what's going on is I'm telling the world that this is what I go through. I wake up in the morning and have to go to school at 10, because by 8 the rebels may still be packing their bags and leaving, and then I have to come back home at 4 instead of 5, or at 3 instead of 5, because I have to reach home and prepare so that I can go and sleep in their loop, you know, away from home. And then I'm also asking, how does it feel like being in a peaceful situation? So that was basically what the poem was about.
You know, this has got me thinking. You're saying that story, and my imagination is running wild, but I'm also thinking, for you to be able to write something, it means you've tapped into a certain space in your mind, you've tapped into a certain world, which, for a lack of a better word, gives you some sort of peace, some sort of calm. How do you find ways to grow up happy and find that peace as a child in that situation?
There are a lot of happy memories growing up, climbing trees. Yes, which is something that culturally a girl is not supposed to do. But I climbed trees, and I went to hunt for birds with the boys, and I would go to the swamp and spend hours eating sugar cane instead of carrying water in a jerry can to come with it home. So there are a lot of happy memories growing up in northern Uganda, but the other side is also there. So a lot of both worlds feature in my writing, especially the current ones. So
you're saying that writing of the experience or the plight of the Acholi child got you a scholarship. But then the scholarship kept going until university. Would you say it's the writing that gave you this chance?
I would say that, especially for the plight of the Acholi child, it got me a scholarship for senior 5. And then for senior 6, I got the school paid my tuition because I was the best student in mock exams. And then, of course, I knew that I wouldn't go past A-level if I didn't get a scholarship to university. So I worked really hard and got a government scholarship.
Good.
And for O-level, Sister Carla, rest in peace, saw that my dad was struggling to pay my fees, and there was a bursary at the district for students who were bright and needy. So although I didn't get the requisite grade to be included into that, she saw that I had potential. So she talked to the district guys and they included me.
Please fix this one in.
Yes, so they fixed me in and O-level was cleared. Primary school was also on scholarship because, so I basically studied on scholarship.
Your destiny, I think, was written, I'm telling you.
But I recently paid for myself for my master's, so that's
something. You've got to do something for yourself, Harriet.
Yes.
So you are a journalist too, so I'm guessing this is what you ended up studying?
Yes.
Ah, okay.
I studied journalism at Makerere, although my dad wanted me to be a lawyer. I would have
and lawyer, doctor, pilot.
But now he's happy with the path I took.
Good.
Yes. So I would have typically done creative writing at university, but Makerere didn't have it. So journalism was the closest for me. And I think the other influence was that my elder sister had already studied journalism. So I was like, okay, why not?
So you would have taken creative writing.
Yes.
And actually, Harriet, for 5 years in a newsroom, Daily Monitor.
Yes.
Obviously, it's something you wanted to do because you wanted to write.
Yes.
So it would only make sense for you to write. Now, when I look at some of the stories you've written, they're all about social issues. You don't keep quiet about something that's happening. Is that what drove you into the newsroom person? Because, I mean, in journalism, there's so many categories. But you decided this is where I'll go.
So journalism, what drove me to journalism was really about the writing. Even when I was at university, I used to write and submit stories to Monitor, The Observer, New Vision. And when I completed my course, I went back to Gulu to look for a job. But I looked at the situation, I was like, okay, I don't think Monitor has a correspondent in Kitgum.
Okay.
And at the time, my sister was staying in Kitgum because she was working for Uganda Radio Network. So I went and put up with her and started corresponding for Monitor. I was the only correspondent. So after 2 months, they called me to Kampala to come and sub-edit. So yes, so that's how I ended up in Kampala and ended up never.
Okay, so I think I asked you this earlier on, and saying that there's journalism and then there's your writing for yourself. And I mean, work is work. You have content that you're supposed to do. You can't veer off. So do you find that one sort of sits on top of the other? Do you still have the time to dig into your passion and write for yourself?
I think it's both ways, really. When I was doing journalism, it was fulfilling. I did a lot of editing in the newsroom, and for me, editing is like, it makes me feel like a surgeon, you know.
Okay.
I'm creating words and molding them and making them, you know, giving them new life, a new face, and that for me is something very fulfilling. And my creative writing is the same, really. As much as I'm highlighting serious stuff, I'm talking about inequality, I'm talking about the madness of our politics, I'm talking about child abuse and gender-based violence. It's, at the end of the day, it's still fulfilling seeing that you've created something, that you're a creator of words.
So the poem that I spoke about at the start, which the title is what startled me, but I've come to understand what it is. Guys, I think we're just alarmists here in Uganda. You have certain things and your heart skips. Is it I bow to my boobs?
For my boobs.
It's actually one of the poems in the collection. It's called A Nation in Labor. A Nation in Labor, you say published 2015?
Yes.
You say there are no copies.
Yeah, it's sold out, but you can buy from Amazon now.
Okay.
I'm working on reprinting.
Okay.
Yeah.
So A Nation in Labor 2015, where did this all start from? Because when I told you, when I saw A Nation in Labor, I said, I'm sure whatever's in here can apply to today.
Yeah. So A Nation in Labor was a poem I wrote in 2012. At the time, there was the issue of the OPM scandal, and donors had threatened to withdraw funding to Uganda. Some of them had actually threatened to withdraw money, and government officials went out saying, we are a sovereign state, you can't threaten us with your donation. But people were suffering because some of these donations were to hospitals.
Yes.
And so I sat back and, asked myself, okay, so are we sovereign? Are we not? Do we say we are sovereign when it suits us or not? And then I looked at the common man who was suffering in all this fight by the elephants. And I thought to myself, Uganda is like, a woman in labor. And that was for me very apt, because when you look at a country like Uganda where more than 16 women die daily in childbirth, I was like, okay, this country must be in labor. Will it give birth to a child who is alive, or will it be a stillbirth? There were a lot of things happening, and yeah, so that's where Nation in Labor comes from. Yeah.
What was the reception when it came out?
Of the book entirely, it was surprisingly good. I think because I had already shared snippets of the poems on my social media platforms, but there was also a lot of support from other writers. Femwrite, my writing group with my writer friends. So it was really, really good, and people still know A Nation in Labor. So,
I mean, writing is kind of art, right?
Yes.
And what I know about art is that it's interpreted differently by different people.
True.
So you write a book as a writer with your own thought in mind.
Yeah.
I read it and
yeah,
I make sense of it how I make sense of it.
Yes.
What has been interesting to hear from people who've read this book?
So the poem you made reference to, I Bow for My Boobs, I think the problem is that there is boobs in the title, so people got excited and think, I'm advocating for nudity or something. And yet the poem is actually about gender-based violence. It's about a woman who lives in an abusive relationship. Her husband comes home daily drunk and beats her up, and then she stands before the mirror and says, okay, my boobs, what if they become stones? What if they become my weapon to hit back at my husband? And culturally, when a woman strips, it's considered a curse.
A curse, yeah.
When she points at her son with her boobs, it means he will not have a wife, or you will
be successful.
Yes, and stuff like that. So the poem is very heavy. It has very heavy cultural undertones, but it also highlights the desperation of a woman who has nothing to defend herself except her body. Yeah. So that for me was the strength of the poem. Yeah.
But I think Ugandans sort of misunderstood it.
But I now know that as a writer, once you've given birth to a poem or a story, you lose ownership of it. People have a right to interpret it in whichever way. So the only thing you can hope for is that people interpret it according to the way you had intended it. But it's not really bad that people interpret your poem in different ways. Yeah. Because a piece of work can have different faces.
That's true. That's very true. Speaking of people reading a book, as a writer, I'm interested to know, do you write with a reader in mind, a specific reader in mind? I've always wondered about that. Or do you just say to the masses? Because it's sort of like what we do. You're always told to not speak to viewers. Yeah. You speak to a viewer. So is that the same thing with writing?
It's a yes and no.
Okay.
Yes. So sometimes, like this poem, I Bow for My Boobs, I didn't write it and I was thinking, okay, now this one is going to be for the men who beat their wives.
Yeah.
So
or the women who are in this situation.
Yes. So I just wrote and thought, whoever it touches, so be it.
Okay.
Yeah, because the thing with limiting yourself to saying I'm going to write for this particular audience, it affects the way your work comes out. It affects the creativity. So the idea is to concentrate on the issue at hand and let whichever audience that it touches touch.
Okay.
Yeah.
In that collection of poems, is there any particular poem that's a story for you? It's Harriet in print.
Why do you want me to spill my secrets?
It's on paper, so we might as well dig deep.
Let me see. Okay, so the poems about the first poem I wrote, The Plight of the Acholi Child, is in this collection, but it's with a different title.
Oh, okay.
So that is my life. There are a couple of other poems that talk about my experiences and the experiences of people close to me that I observe. So it's to a certain extent it's autobiographical, and that is true for a lot of first books that you're bleeding yourself
into the book.
Yes, but as you get along, you sort of distance yourself and write about other people.
I'm not sure if that's a good thing. So in the beginning, I was talking about, yes, I'm hosting Ugandan writers, but there's this whole call for us to tell our story. Even in the movie industry, they're saying that to stop telling the Jen and Jim story. You know, tell our own stories. What does that look like? I'm curious. What does that look like, sound like, read like? What's that?
So I just want us to be careful about thinking that once you're an African, once you're Ugandan, then you automatically write the Ugandan story or the African story. It has to be something deliberate. But it's important that we tell our stories. So when you're writing a short story, what do the characters look like? What are their names? Are they called Opio, or are they called Grant or whoever? Do they travel in planes, or do they take borders? You know, all those details, all those framings are very important, so that, you know, the kids that are in school can be able to identify themselves in the lived experiences. We didn't have that luxury.
I was about to tell you, we read a lot of stories, probably still read them. I'm reading Thrive by Ariana Huffington.
I know.
For God's sake. She talks about certain things in her office, and I'm thinking, what kind of office is this?
I know. There were meals and boons and all that.
But nonetheless, I am reading it. She's on a private jet going somewhere where she's stressed and 10 neurosurgeons around her, and I can't relate, because I'm reading the same stories of neurosurgeons in Uganda, and I can't relate. But nonetheless, I'm reading the book and moving along. So I sometimes I feel like it's not just the changing this to a boda, changing Grant's name to Opio for us to be able to tell our story. It should be deeper than that.
It should, definitely. It should be about because every community, every individual is unique. So that uniqueness can only be told better by someone who has lived that experience or has observed closely that experience, and so that's why it's important that we tell our story. And it's not just about that, it's also about the publishing industry. Who is publishing us? Is it foreign presses who will tell us, you know, you have to rework your story like this so that the audiences abroad, who is marketing our work, who is giving us the literary prizes? So all those count.
How are we able to read God's bits of wood? I'm just thinking, I did literature. I said God's bits of wood. You're like, wow, even this Africa is not mine.
I know.
You know, it was too deep. So I'm wondering what happened that those were able to put out books like that and stories like that, and was still marketed for the world. Why are ours not able to? But you've spoken about funding, and I think that's the question I wanted to ask you about. You were saying who's funding you? Because when they fund you, the content sort of is skewed to their advantage.
True.
So is it that we are not able to fund our own work? Are we not yet at that point where we can?
So Writivism is one of the literary initiatives that are helping nurture Ugandan writers. I'm happy that a lot of young writers are able to write their experiences. They recently had a collection called Odokonyero, and the stories in there are really, really Ugandan stories. And from the title, you can tell.
Of course, I was going to say the title itself.
Yes, so we have FemRight, who is helping nurture women writers. Yeah. We have so many stories, which is helping to groom readers, young readers. 4 years, I think up to like 14. They have a reading every month in different parts of Kampala. And for me, that is very important, because if we are writing, we need also to nurture those who will read us.
Who will read the books.
Yes, so there are a lot of efforts being done. There are different Ugandan born initiatives that are coming up. I also run an organization called Word Oven, which is an editing company, because a lot of our people want to publish, but the publishing industry, the infrastructure is not yet up to par. So how do you meet someone in the middle and say, okay, if you want to self-publish, let it be clean. I don't want to pick the mustard seed and meet an error in the first 2 pages and drop it, which was something that happened. So yeah, so there are the different initiatives that are coming up, but they could be more. Yeah.
So you were talking about we need to nurture people who are going to read these books.
True.
We can't be writing for ourselves. And as we know in the country, every other day we see statistics of like students not being able to read. Just read, also comprehend. Simple things. You're a student, but you can't read. And I'm wondering, are we working towards more writers or more readers?
I think we should work towards both. People read a lot, actually. On social media, people read. If you calculate how much time you keep scrolling on your Facebook, you just be amazed at how much you're reading. So imagine that every time you're scrolling through your timeline, you're meeting a short story, you're meeting a poem, or you're meeting a flash fiction. How wonderful would that be? So yeah. Okay,
great stuff. That's Anena Harriet, the author of a collection of poems, A Nation in Labor, 2015. She says you can only get it on Amazon. It's sold out. But your Facebook and Twitter?
Twitter is AH Petit, and then Facebook is Harriet Anena.
Okay, so you told me you put a few stories there sometimes. And you blog
I also blog on... the blog is called Journeys Within. Yes, where I do commentaries on the the goings on in the country, the poems and stuff like that.
Okay, so that's a good place to actually go and see and read Anena Harriet's writings, and also maybe interact with her as well, Facebook and Twitter. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, it's always a pleasure to have a Ugandan writer in the studios. We'll keep going and keep going. If you are one, please reach out to us. Our hashtag is morning@NTV. Have a good day.
Watching Morning at NTV.